Hello and welcome to The Fringe. My name is Chris Pauwels. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Piranha Games and your host. This is your weekly update on Transverse. It's our science fiction MMO that gives you the ability to create your own destiny and define your future. So on our first episode, what we're going to do is talk about a few Q&A questions from the community. And we have Bryan Ekman, our Creative Director, here to talk to you about that.
Hello.
And then after that, we're going to wrap up the show and we're going to go and see some really cool prototyping. All right, so let's get the show started.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
So our first question comes from Scarth. Will the game be 100% free of NPCs?
You know, it's a great question. And I mean, that's our statement. We want to make this game, Transverse, about the players. We want to make it player-powered, which means that as many of the actions as possible need to be done by the players, as opposed to having a whole bunch of NPCs out there giving you quests and giving you missions. We actually want the players to be responsible for doing that work. Now, there's a chance and there's a probability that we're going to have to add some form of NPC interactions because there's certain conditions. One, around the economy and introducing of credits, and two, a way for players to kind of get started in the universe, so without other help from other players. So I think those are the two conditions that are going to require some form of interaction with an NPC of sorts. But for the most part, the majority of your interactions in Transverse will be with other players.
So mostly player-driven.
That's the goal. That's what we're trying to achieve, and I think it makes for a really interesting sandbox experience.
Yeah, sounds cool. Scarth also has a question, another one. Will ships have fuel? If you run out, do you float freely in space or have to call the equivalent of AAA?
Well, I'll know who to call, who's going to be my AAA person, right? Mr. Scarth, you're going to bail me out, right? Okay. Well, ships have two forms of fuel. One is nuclear in fashion, which means that the lifespan on it is quite a bit longer, and well, you know, you're probably not going to have to replace it as often. Right. And then there's reaction mass, which is, you know, the stuff that actually makes the ships rotate and move around. So the reaction mass is consumed. The rate at which it gets consumed is to be determined yet. We don't want to make this game about managing your gas can. I mean, God knows we already do that enough with our cars, right? Who wants to pay attention to that all the time? But I think it's an important factor inside the game to have to manage fuel. We'll just see what kind of balance there is.
Awesome. Our third question is from Jazuray. How possible will it be to avoid any combat and just haul stuff around as a peaceful trader? To make stuff as a manufacturer or producer of consumables? That's a great question.
It is, and I think, I mean, a lot of what this game is about revolves around the industry aspect, the industry sphere of gameplay, which means that there's this whole component of players who are going to build, harvest, and trade their goods. And they need to be able to do that in a way that is pretty safe, right? We don't want them to go out and constantly have to deal with combat if they don't want to. And I think we can address this by allowing the players to designate like trade zones or safe zones, areas of space that have certain sets of rules that prevent or limit the amount of combat that can happen. And if we do that, then I think you'll create areas for you to enjoy what you're talking about, where you just want to go out and move goods around and not have to worry about constantly being harassed.
Now that brings up another question about policing. Is there a possibility of policing in the game?
Well, you know, it's up to the players. I mean, if you want to pay somebody to basically protect your space, there's nothing preventing you from doing that through a contract system or an agreement. They might ask you to give them a certain amount of credits for a number of hours worked, and in return, they protect you. So that's absolutely doable within the game. And I think we want to extend that into a systemic point of view where we actually allow players to set rules and set laws. And that would be interesting to explore.
That's really cool. Okay, another question is from Blake Attelt. The About section lists 18 different potential jobs. This is what we've been talking about. Some with full descriptions. How much emphasis will be placed on these? Will a character build as an explorer be meaningful and different than one as a scavenger?
Now, that's a great question. And I want to clarify something on that page. If you look at the two rows, and there's a top row and a bottom row, they have very similar roles on the top and the bottom. Essentially, the difference between the top and the bottom is which side of the law you're on. So if the players are determining the rules, then you kind of choose whether, you know, for example, one man's pirate is another man's privateer, or one man's privateer is another man's pirate, depending on how you want to look at it. And so what we want to do is give players the ability to create those rules and those laws, which then feed back into the roles. Now, the 9 roles that we have, which are duplicated into 18, are kind of areas of gameplay that we've identified and activities that we've identified that the player base probably might want to participate in. So it's really important to us to have at least some structure to the roles so that we give you things to do that are fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Kemi has a question for us. Q&A implies that you will have to buy your skins, replacement player after death. Is this true?
Well, there's 2 parts to your adventures in the Transverse. There's your ship, which gets you from A to B, and there's your synth, which hosts your consciousness, right? So that's the who you are. And when in this game, because you're transhuman, you can actually move your consciousness around from one synthetic body to another. And the shape and form of that synthetic body is really up to the creativity of anybody's imagination. I mean, it can be anything from an octopod to a human-shaped form to a furry to to a ship, right? And those are the possibilities. Now, we haven't decided how far away from the human body or the human shape that we're going to go with these synths, but that's just to say there's endless possibilities. Now, when the player dies...
I can't imagine what those possibilities mean.
Yes, well, you just have to be creative to imagine some pretty neat things. So,
okay.
But when the player goes out in their ship and say they encounter a pirate and the pirate destroys them and their synthetic body that was in the ship is destroyed, they're going to wake up back at their safe point where their consciousness is backed up. They're going to download their consciousness to a new synth that they'll have at the ready, and that synth will be up to the player. So they can buy any number of synths and store them wherever they want and be able to download their consciousness between those. You can only have one, though. You can't have multiplicity. So there's no 100 little Chris's running around the universe, wreaking havoc. So sorry.
That'd be cool, though.
Just one. Okay. So one backup and one active. So when you die, you can just download yourself to your new synth, and like an inventory of ships, you can have an inventory of synths to put your consciousness into and enjoy the benefits of that.
Right. So Jaws can ask a question about, can you explain why you cut to the first stretch goal and why the deadline?
It was really about listening to what people were asking us. Our backers and the community were saying, hey, we're not too clear on how the funding works. So what we wanted to do was say, here's our first minimum goal, $500,000 in 30 days. If we don't hit it, we'll refund all the backers' money, and then we'll see what else we're going to do with Transverse. But we really just wanted to make sure and give you guys kind of the peace of mind and follow a bit of the Kickstarter mentality, and just say, hey, there is a hard deadline, and here's what's going to happen.
Cool. That's excellent. Scarth has another question for us.
Good old Scarth.
Yes, he's got a few of them. How will players generate money or credits?
That's a great question. Now, we're still kicking this one around a lot to determine exactly how we're going to add credits into the system. So we imagine that every player that joins will bring with him a certain amount of cash just to kind of add that to the economy. So there's a constant stream of new money into the economy. However, there is the possibility that all the wealth could end up with somebody and exit the game as, say, they decide not to play anymore.
Right.
So that's a big problem because now you have money coming in and money going out and money disappearing. So there will have to be some form of mechanic, whether it's a trade system with, say, one of the outposts, like the R-run outpost, the NPC outpost, where you can bring them a resource and you can trade that for credits. Or we're also looking at the remnants. The remnants being this concept of, it started off as a concept of space cockroaches, but basically some form of monster that players can go kill to generate revenue. So we do realize it's going to be important as the game evolves that there's some form of way for money to come into the system.
What about barter system?
Barter system is for the players.
Yeah.
Now, this is really, that's like, say you want to sell me a ship. Well, we'll strike up a conversation and we'll settle on terms, and then I give you some credits, or I give you some items even, and you give me a ship. So we're going to build a set of escrow systems that allow players to create fair transactions, so you can't scam me and that kind of stuff. You will have to put your stuff in a box, and then I put my stuff in the box, and then the computer says you get this stuff and I get this stuff, right? So there'll be some form of player-to-player trading, absolutely. It's critical in a player-powered game. Nothing goes around unless the players are doing and interacting with each other. So it's really important that we set up hubs, or actually not we so much, but you do. You set up the hubs and markets around the universe for things like that to happen.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, next question is from Original Tibbs. Will created goods, harvested resources have a place where they are, such as it must be transported to get somewhere, leaving it vulnerable to a heist? Mm-hmm. Or will there be a universal auction house that delivers purchases with risk?
Absolutely. I mean, you can only imagine that a player-made object like a ship just doesn't magically fly itself to another point. So if you don't move it, or if another player doesn't move it for you, or you pay them to do it, guess what?
It stays there.
It's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So it's up to the players to move goods around the universe at the rate at which they can move it, which obviously brings into all kinds of concepts like time management and the economics of shipping and the cost of shipping, because everything has to be moved by a player, so players' time is valuable. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of businesses come from just the trading and moving of goods. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, we got another question from Levin K. Will we be able to see the progress in the game independently in small intervals? Or will require the overhead of joining a guild and coordinating with pre-made teams?
We don't want players to feel like they have to be part of something big, like a group or a guild. Ideally, they'll be able to progress in the game at their own pace by themselves or with friends. Mm-hmm. So flat out, super important. I know it is for me. I'm a big lone wolf player. I just kind of want to go in, do my thing, interact with people when I feel like it. I will absolutely want to make sure that's supported in this game. And progression is really tied to what you do. It's tied to your actions. It's tied to the things that interest you. So basically the role you play. Since your role is defined by your actions, it makes perfect sense that it's up to you to figure out when and how you progress.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Last question is from ArchSight. Is there any chance we can get a rear view mirror?
Well, there's two parts to this question. Every game needs a rear view mirror, especially if you're in a vehicle. There's always a technical challenge and always a cost associated with doing a second viewport, because effectively you're rendering a different part of the scene again. Mm-hmm. So that means you're basically rendering the game twice.
Yeah.
So often this boils down to, where do you want your performance to go? Do you want it to go to something that is useful? And I'm not saying a mirror wouldn't be useful. I think it would, because it would give you some tactical awareness, but there might be some other way we can offer the same kind of awareness feature without having an overhead of rendering two viewports. So I'm not saying no, but that would be one of the reasons why we wouldn't do it if that came to it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's it for the questions on this episode. We have a lot more from the community, and we're going to be getting to as many as we possibly can. So pay attention to our next episode next week. Also on the website, www.transversegame.com, we have a ton more content on there. So it's a great place to go and learn a lot more about our game, and to hear a lot more about your questions and answers, those type of things. So I think what we need to do is cut the chit-chat, and thank you very much, Brian.
My pleasure.
But we're going to cut the chit-chat. We're going to go right to the cool stuff, which is the prototyping.
Ooh, awesome. So we have a bit of a sneak peek about ships and what Dave's been working on in Unreal 4.
Sweet.
Awesome.